everyone. Welcome to the Interagency Modeling and Analysis Group Multiscale Modeling Consortium webinar series. I am happy to welcome all the participants for this webinar hosted by the Systems Biology Working Group of the MSM Consortium, and I will turn it over to Dr. Sasha Popel.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker, or speakers actually. Hessam Sarjoughian received his PhD in electrical and computer engineering at the University of Arizona, and he is presently an associate professor of computer science and the co-director of the Arizona Center for Integrative Modeling and Simulation. His areas of research include multi-formalism modeling, hybrid software, hardware systems modeling, collaborative model development, and next-generation modeling and simulation tools. He directs ISU's online modeling and simulation Master of Engineering program. And his collaborators, co-presenters are Anthony Hunt from UCSF and Jennifer Linderman from the University of Michigan. Welcome, Hessam, and thank you for presenting this seminar.
Thank you very much, Sasha. I'll go ahead and as I said, just turn off myself. All right. So let me first say, this is actually a very good opportunity for us. I've been basically hosted by Tony Hunt during my sabbatical. So this presentation and webinar is really an outcome of that interaction. Also Jennifer as well since earlier this year. So let me sort of focus the presentation on the topic. So I think that the main goal here for us has been, do we have a need to compose models that are heterogeneous in the way they are described, far ahead of time actually in terms of so this is the outline of this webinar. We will go through really 4 stages. I think the last stage is the one that we actually try to make concrete suggestions. But before that, we will go through really the idea of the need. I think that's where we would have Jennifer actually describe her research and the approaches that she's using towards modeling. Then I start working on the descriptions on polymorphic and monolithic modeling. And then in the middle part, hybrid environment and hybrid environment human, we'll discuss some specific details to help ground the idea of heterogeneous model composability. So I'll turn it over at this time to Jennifer.
Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So my goal here is just real quick to give a practical, real example so that we all understand what Hessam's going to talk about. So in this example of multi-scale modeling, so on this slide it shows the experimental setup. So the idea is to look at breast cancer cell chemotaxis, which is important in metastasis, and obviously you want to inhibit that. In this particular experiment, we look at the cells moving in a microfluidic device, which is shown at the top, and there's 3 stripes of cells, which are labeled red, blue, and green, respectively, and the slide just left me. So now I'm doing this without seeing the slide. Okay, so the red, let's see if I can get it back up again. Oh, it's coming. The red stripe of cells are cells that are secreting the chemokine, which is CXCL12, and then it diffuses in the device. The cells that are labeled in blue are expressing the CXCR4 receptor, which binds to the chemokine, and as a result, those cells migrate up a concentration gradient. So those are the cancer cells. And then the final group of cells, the ones that are labeled in green, express the receptor CXCR7, and that is actually a scavenging receptor for the chemokine. And so what you see with time is the red cells and the green cells kind of spread out, but the blue cells show a net chemotaxis to the left. And you can manipulate the amount of chemotaxis by changing the secretion rate or the isoform that's being secreted, by changing the distances between the cells, the stripes, by changing the numbers of receptors on the green cells and the blue cells, that kind of thing. So it's a device that we're using to try to understand chemotaxis. And if you look at the next slide, Hessam, can you advance it one?
Yes.
Okay, so this just tells a little bit about the multiscale model that we have developed for this system. It's like other multiscale models that we and others have developed. So I want to point out different elements of it. So the chemotaxis of the CXCR4 positive cells is described, it's the slowest step, so that's described with an agent-based model. So the cells are agents and they're moving around on a lattice, and it might be 2D or 3D depending on your application. The chemokine secretion and any receptor ligand binding dynamics are described with ordinary differential equations. Same thing for the chemokine internalization and any intracellular signaling processes, as are often described with ordinary differential equations. And then finally, the diffusion of the chemokine in the environment is described, of course, by the diffusion equation, which is a partial differential equation. And so what we have is a hybrid model. So we've got ODEs, PDEs, and an agent-based model. And we have to link them together. They all have to talk to each other. And so we and others have done this, but I would say that the methods we've used to connect things are very ad hoc, and that tends to slow us down. And so really the question here is there anything from the theory or the practice or the research in computer science that will enable us to move more quickly in this round, so that we have individual ideas or we're starting from scratch with a model? What should we know and think about from the get-go as opposed to trying to do it ad hoc after the fact? So I'm going to turn it back to Hessam.
Great. Thank you. So so basically the idea of composing models is actually not new, and there have been a lot of work done in this area, but I would say mostly related to systems that are very well understood. Networks are one of those systems, but then in the last several years we've been working on the systems, one so-called enterprises, and that's basically intercorporation supply chain system, where they have a variety of different kinds of models that have to be actually synthesized and simulated. Similarly, we've been doing some work with anthropologists and geologists, climatologists, where we wanted to understand how basically humans and landscape interact. So we're going to look more closely at this example, mainly because I think it's more similar to systems biology as compared with the Intel project, which is more engineered system. So let me contextualize what we mean by composition. So at the top level, we have basically knowledge. Then we usually try to derive models from the knowledge. And then we try to build simulators that actually can execute those models. And finally, we like to experiment with these models that are actually implemented, coded. So what happens in general is the scope and the purpose for which a model is developed actually is quite important. If we are usually doing exploration of some ideas, we actually don't get into details. We try to use as simple as possible of a model to simulate what we like. But as we start to really try to understand how details of a system actually sort of work and how systems should be engineered, then we need to really use much more sophisticated and really detailed models. So I think that's the key point. First and foremost, what is the need towards going basically a hybrid or model composability? On the far right, you also see operations. That's actually yet another capability for which you can actually try to run simulations and derive the execution of a system, both by humans but also by computer. So what I'm trying then to focus in the 3 bullets is we all know that systems are inherently built from really disparate parts that interact. And I think we can say in many cases interactions actually turn out to be more interesting to look at than the individual parts. Then I think the question is really, do we need to use different model types? Because we can have a system really described using the same modeling methods, but really describing different parts of the system. The example that Jennifer actually described, I think, is a demonstration that we have cases where, for example, ordinary differential equations are needed, agent-based modeling is needed, and then the question is, if we have such a need, what steps can we take towards really composing models that are described in different kinds of modeling methods. Here is on the far right hand side, you see kind of a layering representation. Typically, I think we like to say there is software starting from the bottom. Below that we have hardware, but let's say we have software on top of hardware, and then we like to build simulators using some existing software technology. But then what we actually prefer even more is to describe our models independent of really what the simulator itself is, which means also we want to be not tightly coupled to the software itself. And then on top of that, there are other kinds of layers, for example, searching through models, storing models, and other things. So I think the key point, therefore, is do we benefit by really trying to do so-called domain-specific modeling and domain-neutral modeling with the capability to compose models at that level. So a hybrid model, I think we normally think of representing a system that really is composed of different parts. I think usually we try to use the best fit model for a given problem. We do not like to, in the case where we really have the question of science and engineering, hide out or really abstract out important details of a system, which therefore implies we need to use really appropriate kinds of models. Here I would say, like for molecules, it's important to use ODEs and PDEs, both in terms of their temporal and spatial dynamics. But then, when we want to say how cells move from one location to another at the higher level, we use agent-based modeling. So that's where we see the need for using best fit model for the purpose at hand. So, but what happens is usually, even though systems are heterogeneous, we end up actually, once we get to the model development phase, we make them homogeneous in the way we actually proceed to implement them. Here is a snapshot of modeling methods. So what we see on the left-hand side, there is systems theory, which has well-defined modeling methods. They are quite important because they give us the grounding to describe concepts with formal properties. Below that, we have automata theory, and that itself is well defined and quite important. And then below that, you note that I put agent-based modeling not in neither systems theory nor automata theory or other kinds of theories. That's because agent-based modeling mostly is really grounded in software concepts, idea of components as software. And that's where I think some of the difficulties are when we start to synthesize different kinds of models. So what we therefore ask ourselves is, should models really lend themselves to alternative, possibly mixed design techniques, software, basically implementations, different hardware platforms. And as you can see in the middle, usually we like to say, let us define the dynamics and structure of a system using modeling languages, really, and generate code from the modeling languages, which basically means we don't try to really write programs, but more develop models and automatically generate code from the models. That currently is actually not very straightforward to do. If we do achieve the ability to describe our model formally without use of programming languages, I think will be quite powerful in our abilities, because really modelers can have the flexibility to develop their abstractions without really getting down into software implementation. This slide is just to again emphasize that we usually have to look at the idea of a model in the context of experiments and really a system. So what we are looking at here is two kinds of model representations. And what happens is, usually, when we are coding, we don't support the user to think at this level of abstraction. We write these, let's say, on some piece of paper, and then we go and translate that to code through programming. We want to avoid that, and to avoid it, actually, it's not so difficult if you look at individual parts, but when we get to composition of different kinds of models, it becomes challenging. So what are the problems that we face when we compose models? I think that the basic ones is very well understood. Basically, all models have to, at the end, interact through exchanging their outputs with other models and receiving inputs from the others. And what we see here is models can have a piecewise continuous property, or they could have piecewise constant and event type representations. So to really bridge the gap between these different data types, we usually end up not using models. We basically handle the differences within the models that are being actually composed. And we want to solve this problem by saying, can we describe the interactions between two models as a separate model? So this is, I think, a good way of looking at why these different modeling methods, of course, have to be synthesized. What's important? What are the different aspects of them that makes them difficult to be composed? So on the differential equation side, we see the time base is continuous, but on a discrete time base is discrete. So really matching the continuous time and discrete time is one important aspect. Once we, for example, go to agent-based modeling, basically we reduce the continuous time to time, and that becomes potentially a problem. There are other aspects in this slide that you see. For example, inputs, outputs, and states have different characteristics. Similarly, input segments, states, and output segments. So at the bottom of this slide, what we want to avoid again is to really require the modelers to work with programming languages. We want to reduce that as much as we can. These are sort of just description or seeing how we actually have to bridge the differences between these three kinds of modeling methods: difference equation, discrete event, and differential equations. So the basic really concept of this webinar is this slide, which is, if I have two models, model 1 and model 2, model 1 is of type A, this could be ODE, and let's say model 2 is type B, let's say is a rule-based agent model. How do we combine these two? The way currently most people do, this is done by exchanging data. Model 1 and Model 2 exchange their inputs and outputs. But what we like to do is actually put a model there, which means how do we, in fact, represent the interactions between two different models described in two different modeling methods. So as we said earlier, the prominent approach is really use one model type, and that's useful because you really have to then have one modeling and simulation tool. You work within one framework, and that has advantages. However, as we said, there are problems where this is not practical. This approach is not practical. So here we need multiple methods, which means we need to compose different model types, which then also we need to have different MNS modeling and simulation tools. Here is an example of one method. So here we have basically modeled the agents which represent humans and landscape represented by cellular automata, but these two modeling methods are closely related, so it was a lot easier to do. One problem we ran into was scalability. It didn't really scale well because the landscape is very large, whereas the number of agents is very small. But when we go to multiple methods, we have to really encounter some issues. One is on the left-hand side, we see that the inputs and output for what we call composable cellular automata network uses cells and value, whereas the agents use port and value. So port is an interface to a component or a model, whereas cell is the model itself. There are also disparities with respect to the timing. The landscape model actually changes its behavior over discrete time steps, whereas agents actually do their behavior at arbitrary time instances. They take their actions at arbitrary time instances. This is a method called a discrete event system specification, which we have used, and it allows us to hierarchically build a model bottom up or top down. And this is the composable cellular automata. And I think the key point here is that these cells are independent, but their interactions with the outside world is through basically another model, a network model, and that is mathematically shown to be correct. We don't have to guess as how these cells actually interact with agents. So this MedLand exemplar, this is where we have the Mediterranean environment human dynamics. So we have agents representing humans and cellular automata representing landscape. The idea is on the right-hand side, the mono formalism, we really represented everything within one framework. When we went to the polyformalism, or using different model types, we went to the concept of putting a model in between the landscape model and the agent model. And that really proved to be useful because we could scale the models arbitrarily, but more importantly, we could manage how the dynamics of a landscape would be communicated to the agents and vice versa. So it allowed us to really put control on the interactions between the landscape and the human models. So this is a little similar to the example Jennifer showed us at the beginning. So we can see we have a spatial requirement, we have temporal requirements, and we have different levels of abstractions or resolutions in these three layers of models. And their composition, really we did it at the modeling level before we went to implementation. So I think this is a little bit more details. Maybe I should skip them in the interest of time. But let me get to this slide, which is showing the concept of knowledge interchange broker. And this is where we actually define and formalize the disparities between different kinds of modeling methods. In other words, rather than sort of waiting to do these interactions in the code, we develop a model. We show its properties, we can prove certain timing properties, data transformation properties, and then from that we go and create actually code. So in a kit, we basically worry and account for different input-output characteristics of the models that are composed. We actually can separately handle data transformation from one model to the other. That means we actually handle knowledge reduction, knowledge augmentation. We also can deal with single and multi-value data types. These things can be done at the code level. It's just, I think, too difficult to do. It's better to be modeled first explicitly, then again translated to code. And the third bullet, it talks about the timing. Actually, an important point on timing is when we have the kib in the middle between two models, we can let it control the frequency of execution of the models that are composed. So in a sort of abstract sense, the knowledge interchange broker has a model, a specification of its own, has an execution protocol, and then we support 4 properties regarding the interactions: message mapping, timing, synchronization, and concurrency. The benefit of concurrency is because we have the knowledge interchange broker, we really can let the 2 models that are being executed to be completely independent. And this is an example of these functions we see in the KIP itself. So the equations at the top and bottom in the middle box represent transformations, which could include timing as well. So we could average over some length of time or do some other kinds of approximations. The idea is, let's say the landscape model doesn't need to know as much details as, let's say, agent needs to know about itself, and vice versa. So this is really about the disparities of the tools. So the idea here is that the agent simulator and the landscape simulator are different, but the modeler really shouldn't worry about that. He or she should be really sort of not be required to know a lot of details about these. This is the same issue about timing. Again, the Dev Suite simulator has innate sense of timing. The landscape model actually doesn't have a specific timing. It actually executes over sequences, and then we treat that as being time steps. So I think we get to the last part of the presentation, which is to say, if we can compose models early on, we really can benefit, because it makes really use of simulators simpler. It also can help with experimentation, visualization of the data as well. So I think what we are really saying is it's quite important to separate model from simulation, and that is a elementary step, is a basic step, which then allows us to really deal with composability. And then we have the interoperability, which is really, for the most part, is a solved problem, but the reuse and composability remain to be really difficult and ongoing research problems. By the way, I think use of the knowledge interchange broker and having this interaction model also helps with performance. This is to sort of cast some issues we face when we look at the idea of model correctness at the very top. Basically, I think the more capability we have to show individual models are correct, the better we are, because we can also, with the idea of KIP, show their interaction is correct too. But this is highly domain dependent, and of course, what we see below is creating correct model really depends on model grounding. So what we are saying here is human agents, we could less formally ground them with respect to their correctness as opposed to the landscape models. And I think the other thing is the issues of really simulation itself, implementation, simulation scale, and the predictability that we could expect. I think this is really a summary of compositional model types. So what we perceive to be important is disciplined model composition is important. And that means we have to explicitly represent interactions between model types. This allows us flexibility. It would really remove model composition from execution. And then it also should help us with newer modeling methods that may emerge in the future to be composed with existing modeling methods. We said, it's really better to develop models independent of any programming languages or simulation tools. And I think what we say at the bottom is modelers will be able to use and change existing models, create and compose new models. It's better for them to do it than really software or simulation tool developers. And this is the concluding slide. So what we are trying to emphasize here is we can really use modeling methods at the theoretical level, but then once we get to detailing domain knowledge in these modeling methods, we end up in the monolithic approach, really using code to translate our modeling concepts and modeling methods into code, but the models themselves aren't actually, their interactions aren't described explicitly. Moving to the far right is to really help us provide composition of modeling methods, which basically means we can actually describe the components of a system independently, compose them also using a modeling method, and then they would be really supported with simulators and software. So I think the question that we pose is really inquiries, hypotheses, and experiments, the kinds of needs simulation is supposed to support, really can benefit from composing modeling methods as opposed to really composing or actually integrating their simulation and code. And with that, I'll go to Q&A in case there are questions.
I would encourage everyone to unmute their mics and their videos so we can start our question session.
Hi, Bill Litton with a question.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I wondered if there's any specific data interchange formats that have been developed for what seems to be one of the main difficulties, which is when you go from an agent-based or a particle-based simulation on one side to a deterministic ODE or PDE continuous on the other side. Is that something that people have really worked out a standard way of doing, or is that still in being looked at?
We actually have done that for the Intel project. We have about 400 of those transformations, and we use XML schema to do that. That domain is very well understood, so we have those 400 odd number of transformations. And in fact, what we do, we have a kind of a structured approach to do that, because we want the interaction model, the KIP, to be what some modelers use. I didn't mention or focus on that, but that's exactly not your question. Could we have modelers who really can just work on the interactions themselves? And that's what we can do. So in the case of Intel project, that's pretty much standardized. But when we go to the human landscape, that's much less so.
So it sounds like it's still pretty domain specific, though.
The method itself is not, but what happens is the data that's needed, it varies because there are no standardization in the domain itself. Maybe I should also mention that regarding the question that Bill asked, the interaction model we have for the Intel project actually turns out to be quite more complex than the models that are being composed. In that case, we are composing an optimization model described using linear programming, and that the reason I said no, there are 400 transformations because that LP actually produces a lot of information. Much of it won't be useful for the simulation of the supply chain, the manufacturing processes and logistics. But on the logistics and processes, we have about 600 components, and again, we have a lot of I/O going from one side to the other, and that's the reason we have so many transformations. When this is not done in this interaction model, that same kinds of transformations are done, but usually they are in some way divided between what's done on the simulation side, on the simulation of the logistics and processes, as opposed to really being separated.
I have a question. I may have missed part of the presentation because for some reason the video, I lost it, so I had to re-sign in. I was wondering whether, you may have discussed it before, but whether you applied some of those techniques to the problem that was presented on the second or the third slide about studying the cells, the cancer cells.
Not yet. That's our goal, to find out how to apply this composability concept to the kinds of problems that Jennifer described.
I see.
We believe, at the sort of on the principles it should work. Of course, I think the challenge always is the details, and really, for example, identifying the kinds of interactions that are important. Let's say from ODE to let's say the agents. What could be the level of abstraction, the level of data that needs to be transmitted. That's actually done in the current ABM. So that's where you saw the sort of time granularity from minutes, to seconds. So that's the level this is currently being done. I think the data that's also being exchanged is through really reading and writing data. There is no actual data transformation taking place, I believe, at this point. Jennifer, am I right?
Can you hear me? So we are exchanging the ABM, ODE, PDE stuff in a very ad hoc way. We're syncing at various time points. We're figuring out the appropriate time steps for everything. We're doing it all, I would say, by hand, but of course the computer's doing it. But we're doing it all very, very consciously. We have nothing that can do it for us. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I think what might be, I think, important is if you were to do data transformations, actually, for example, let's say agent would produce some data over 10 steps, but you want to aggregate that and give an average value. How would that be done?
So we're not doing that right now. We take whatever number of time steps we need to take to make the solver work, and we output whatever system of equations or agents is necessary at that point and feed it into the next thing.
Like the fact that you have established a discrete time step just provides an interval in which you'll solve whatever continuous function you happen to have. Right? It's not as if you're going to go backwards in the other direction. Right? The question is the difficult transformation, how you would do it, is if you want to update the continuous time component of the model at an interval shorter than what the ABM would otherwise output. I can't imagine how that would actually work because ABM is working on that time step, right? So if you want that phenomenon to be captured, you would just decrease the time step of the rules that your ABM is actually working under. I can't imagine any other way that you would actually do that. So, I mean, that's why, once you invoke an agent-based model, to a certain degree, you've almost kind of solved some of the interface issues with respect to communicating the output from the continuous model to the ABM by the process that we just described. I don't think there's any way to completely generalize that relationship other than to say that you've essentially picked your interval by the smallest interval within your discrete time component of your simulation, which is what everybody does. So I'm not actually quite sure what your transform model is actually accomplishing in the architecture that you described. But that's part of my own prejudice because based on your categorization, I'm thinking of it as a mono model. It's an ABM which has, continuous components running underneath within those time intervals. So for me, just my own thinking, is once you've already got people who are conversant in describing their hypotheses in the form of a existing formalism, be it an ABM, a discrete model, or whatever, once they're already familiar with how to do that, then the composability problem becomes an engineering task, which is what you're doing. Right? The bigger challenge, in my opinion, is how do you leverage those people who are able to express their medical hypotheses in some sort of rule or mechanistic sort of way and facilitate their ability to represent that knowledge in a formal or computable form. Right? That, I think, is the major challenge. I think you were operating at one level of expertise beyond that particular point, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm not sure if I totally followed, but let me say this, that the issue of allowing modelers to describe what they want to define at the higher level is important. So I think the composability really just tries to solve one part of the problem, which is to say, can we separate interactions between two model types and really represent it as such? I think the idea is that we can obviously write interfaces, and one model will call the interface of the other model and ask for some information, which is really what the ABM is doing. ABM essentially is getting input from one model and then giving it to another model. But it's in a way it's not separated out. It's rather glued in. But if we can say the interactions, the input and output exchanges with the ability to be defined explicitly, as opposed to really being just called upon by the ABM on the two composed models. I think that's the value we have seen, because the interactions between the two models are really separated. And of course, you are right, that this becomes really an engineering task in terms of building the simulator and building the infrastructure. But if people look at the interactions independently of what's being done on the two ends, I think that has value, because my belief is in the future we will have really domain experts who really don't want to know so much about the two ends. What they want to know is what's going on in between the two parts. So they would be less and less really interested or have the expertise to get inside the internals of the two composed models, but rather act as a broker, which is really what this is about. Is there someone who can broker the interactions between two different types of models?
The other thing I would add to that, Hessam, is that right now, if we have a model going, it has an ODE and a PD and an ABM, and the student who's working on it, who wrote it, everything's fine, wonderful, super. And then that student leaves, and then another person comes in, and they want to add another ABM and link it to that, or another ODE or a PD model or whatever. And there's a very long startup time for someone to figure out how to do this and go back and remember how everything was linked. And although we know how to do it, it seems like it takes a lot longer than it needs to, just to link another kind of model in. And so if we had some standard ways to do that, your composability, your model of the interaction, maybe that would help.
I think that's the intent, basically. I think students and really practitioners face this problem because there is kind of a chasm from the concept they have to the code. And because the composition is really done at the software level, that's where they have trouble. I think they have to work with. That's really what I was trying to show. I think I don't have this slide active anymore, but I think that the idea is to help them follow methods, composability methods, and think at that level. They actually formulate what these interactions are using the model that sits in between. And then I think it should be easier to move towards the code. That's our experience, but also I think this is the experience in like, for example, automotive industry, where they do a lot of simulations. So they have to, again, synthesize different kinds of models, but they do it much more at the modeling level, and they tend to generate code from the models. I think that's the hope. That can this be applied to systems biology? Do we have the right level of understanding and knowledge of the dynamics, the interactions that can lend themselves to specification, really in a formal way, or would we really right now can just do in terms of input and output exchanges, saying they would occur at some time interval, but we don't really have much more at hand right now.
So coming from Arizona State, I'm assuming you have like that devs background. So my recollection, I'm not expert by any stretch of the imagination, was that the high-level architecture was an outgrowth of that particular formalism with the intent of providing some sort of interoperability mechanism for devs models developed by different people. Is that a correct impression, and is that something that you're drawing upon when you are looking at this particular problem?
You are correct. What happened was, we used devs, but then when we wanted to integrate it with other kinds of models, we had trouble. As I said, one key problem was the scalability. And because if I use devs, basically I have to adhere to all of its constraints, right? What it requires me to do. And that was the difficulty. We could make the model work at smaller scale, but as we wanted to make the interactions flexible and also really more tuned, separate from the model that's really well defined in devs, we had to figure out another way to do it. So it is inspired, by basic concepts of modularity, hierarchy, separation of a model from simulator. So it is, the KIB actually uses all those concepts. The only difference is we say devs, if I were to build a model according to the theory, I cannot do some of the things I can do in the interaction model. It would be illegitimate to do that. And therefore, simulator would actually not be correct, even though it will execute. That's the problem we have. Once we get to the code, we can really do things that we find rather surprising afterwards. Because the code really is still very difficult for it to enforce certain, let's say, rules, certain correction mechanisms. So I cannot formally verify the code is correct often. It's actually a difficult task. So what we try to do is do it at the modeling layer, compose them to lessen the dependency on actually checking the code, testing it. But you are correct that it's inspired by devs. But more generally, I would say systems theory and automata theory. I think it's really inspired by both of those.
Are there any final questions or comments? Any
Thank you very
concluding
much.
remarks from Sasha or Dan? If not,
Now, just want to thank the speakers and Hessam and Jennifer and Tony for the seminar, for the presentation. It was very, very useful and informative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
thank you. Bye.